Ladies and gentlemen, kicking off the first stop on his world tour, our new president and prophet, Russell M. Nelson! You say you want some revelation, well, here you go. It's gonna blow your freaking mind.
Greetings, brothers and sisters. Welcome to the weekly Mormon News Roundup with Kolby Reddish Ryan McKnight and DJ's ruminate on the great and spacious beehive. Today is the 21st of review. 60 minutes Ryan McKnight, welcome to the Mormon News Roundup.
Hey, DJs, thanks for having me.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here. So, not everybody knows who you are, but I think everybody should know who you are. You're a Las Vegas-based accountant who played an instrumental role in making Mormon policy forbidding children of LGBTQ parents from being baptized. You're probably best known for Mormon Leaks, so founding that with your co-founder there, Ethan Dodge. So who are you?
I mean, that's a pretty good summary of it. Mormon Leaks morphed into, as I'm sure you know, Truth and Transparency, which I think is the website you're actually scrolling through there. And that was sort of our attempt to do some deeper investigative journalism, because the initial site, Mormon Leaks, was we didn't write articles. We had wiki entries. We had our own wiki, and but we were really just a repository of documents and videos and the things that we had. And we would, if you look at our wiki entries from that era, we were just sort of putting something out there and in a very vanilla way describing what it was, so that other journalists could use it in their stories. And actually, it's just a little bit tied to what we're going to talk about today. When we broke the story about the 13 shell companies, that ended up being sort of the first time that we had done any kind of investigative journalism, in our pursuit to verify the information. And after we were done with that, we thought, we kind of liked it, and we thought maybe we should do our own investigative journalism instead of relying on others to use our material. And so that was where the idea of Truth and Transparency was born from. And the other component that we were trying to do was to expand beyond Mormonism and do articles about other religions as well, which we did a little bit, but not as much as we wanted to.
Yeah, so I mean, your Mormon Leaks became the Truth and Transparency Foundation. It filed its last report in 2022. Why did you fold up shop?
Well, it's not an easy question to answer in a short period of time, but the Reader's Digest version of that is, in 2020 with COVID, there ended up being kind of a perfect storm that affected us negatively. There was COVID, of course, and all the personal challenges that came with that, and not being able to, dedicate a lot of time to Truth and Transparency Foundation. But the other thing, right after the lockdown, within a week or two, I think it was, the Jehovah's Witnesses filed a lawsuit against us because of some things that we had published about them. And, we struggled to raise funds for our defense because it was COVID and everybody was holding on to their cash. And we just were not able to get an adequate defense put up. We didn't have the money for it. Every attorney we talked to felt like we had pretty much a slam dunk winning case, but we just didn't have the money to go up against the Jehovah's Witness Church. So we struggled with that lawsuit. Ultimately, it was settled. There's articles out there if people want to read about that, about, even the settlement. I think we published the settlement. And that kind of depleted us, not just financial. I mean, basically, when that was over, we had no money. And so it depleted us financially, but more importantly, I think it depleted us emotionally and mentally. It was probably one of the most stressful things I've ever gone through in my life. I know Ethan, it was stressful for Ethan as well. It took a lot of the wind out of our sails. We kind of went on a hiatus after that. I should say that before we got sued, we were working on this big story that we were hoping would sort of take the organization to the next level in terms of awareness. And we kind of put that thing on the back burner for a couple of years. It ended up being the story that we published in April of 2022 and made it our final story because we just didn't have the funding to go forward. We were kind of tired of working for free for 5 years, however long it was. And we decided to just publish the story in April of 2022 about the real estate findings that we had, and then just sort of, have that be our, magnum opus, for, if you will, or whatever you want to call it, and ride off into the sunset. And we've got other stuff that we're kind of working on, that's loosely related, but that's that. We've done our best to keep the website up so people can still read the articles and access all the documents. And so far, we've been able to do that.
Well, I did want to ask you, it seems like you have receded a little bit from the bright spotlight of the mid 2010s. And I know that secrecy is not your thing. So maybe you can tell us what is it that what projects are you currently working on? Are they related to religion? Are they related to Mormonism, or what are you working on?
Well, a couple of things I've got cooking are a little bit too early in the process for me to really talk about, but I think the one thing that I think that we're working on that I think Ethan and I are both hoping can happen in the next year or so is we're writing a book about the experience, about the whole thing. And I think I won't speak for Ethan, but for me, I think one of the motivations for writing the book is, well, I think there's two main motivations. I think one, I'd like to create a record of what happened, to last for time and all eternity, if you will. And the other thing too is I think it might be, interesting to maybe give people a little glimpse of some of the stuff that we've never been able to share publicly, that maybe we can share. In the book, I think there's still probably some things we're not going to be able to share just to protect particular sources and things like that, but just to give people a little bit of a behind the scenes look. So
yeah, obviously you're best known for the founding of Mormon Leaks. And you founded that, I'm sorry, was that back in 2013? When did you found Mormon Leaks? And when did you found it? Why did you found it? What's it all about? This is the page here, and it talks about leadership, finances, abuse, training. It has this is a wiki page that goes along with it. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Wasn't quite back as far as 2013. 2013 would actually be when I actually left the church. So if you've ever seen that date associated with me, it was probably, because of that. Okay. But as far as Mormon Leaks goes, it's one of those things that was not planned, and it's kind of like happens by accident because you're kind of in the right place at the right time. I was, I was involved in I guess you can call leaking the November policy. I don't know if it can really be called a leak, but that's kind of what the the average person looks at that as having been a leak, just because the church did try to quietly roll it out. I played a behind the scenes role in that coming out. And I wasn't like in any of the news articles or anything like that, but people on Reddit knew I played a role in that. So I kind of became, everybody dubbed me the leaker if you were on Reddit back then. I think that was November 2015, I believe. And so I became the leaker on Reddit. And people would contact me after that from time to time with like things that they thought were leaks. Most of it was nonsense from my perspective. But then in 2016, somebody reached out to me, and it was like right before the fall general conference. They reached out to me. They were like, hey, I've got these 15 videos that I've always wanted to put out there, but I've never really known how to do it without it being traced back to me. And I was like, yeah, I'll put them on YouTube if you want. I didn't even know what the videos were when they contacted me. I don't think they even really told me exactly what they were, just that they were, videos from inside the church headquarters. And yeah, so you've just pulled those up. So if people go to our YouTube page, there are additional videos since we published these, but the first, if you go and look at the very first 15 uploads, those are the original videos. And they're basically closed circuit recordings of briefings that people would give to the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. So think about it like, so for people that don't know, you have to think about the Quorum of the 12 Apostles as the board members of the church. Think of like a publicly traded company that has a board. And the board decides who, the president, or, sometimes maybe referred to as a CEO, so they've chosen Russell Nelson to be the president, and then, the council, and then he chooses his counselors, kind of like a president would choose his VPs, if you think of it like that, because they actually run it like a business structure like that. And so these videos are the board members, the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, having briefings from various different people on various different topics, politics, social issues, um, retention issues among members. I think there's a video about that. And so I put them up on YouTube. I called it just on a whim. I just called it Mormon Leaks. The guy said, actually, I don't even know if it was a man or a woman that contacted me, but the person who contacted me said, "Hey, if you can get these up before a conference, I think that'd be awesome." So I like rushed to do that. I think I had them like set to auto publish like an hour before conference or something, and then I just kind of let it go. And I actually wasn't online that morning, that Sunday morning, and later in the afternoon, I noticed that my phone had blown up and these videos had gone viral. The one that really went viral, I hadn't even had a chance to watch it because I watched like all the short ones. There's a bunch of them that are like under 10 minutes. I watched all those before I published, but the ones that were like an hour long, I didn't watch those. I just threw them up there. And one of those long ones had some really newsworthy stuff in it. So there was a big media frenzy up to and including a New York Times article where now my name is out there, and I started getting inundated now with people reaching out to me with things that they wanted to publish. I mean, it was unbelievable, really, how many people started contacting me. And I realized that I said, there's obviously a need for this. I didn't really see any kind of outlet that was focusing on this type of a thing. And so I said, there's obviously a need for this, but I can't half-ass this. This is like, piss or get off the pot time, right? And so I kind of reached out, put together a team of people where we brainstormed, the website and how it would look like. And, there you go. It was, I wasn't sure it was going to work. It was kind of like, if you build it, they will come mentality, but obviously we didn't know. And I think one of the things that helped us is we ended up getting a lot of press when we launched the website. And we launched the website without any big leak. We were launching the website on the shoulders of those 15 videos, which at that point were probably, I don't know, a couple months old and, out of the news cycle. But this is late 2016. So if you remember, this is like, Donald Trump's rise, and there was a lot of news back then also about WikiLeaks, and and I think it was connected to Donald Trump. So WikiLeaks was getting, covered a lot. And I think we originally called the website Mormon WikiLeaks. And I think that ended up inadvertently helping us get a lot of press early on from like international and national outlets. So and then we published our first big leak a couple weeks later. I guess that's that.
Let me ask you, what do you consider to be the biggest leak that Mormon Leaks found? Is it the November policy, which really got you started? Is it those leaked 15 videos of the inner church sanctum of the briefings that mostly Elder Gong gave the senior leadership? Or is it what I actually kind of feel that it is the leaker that found the shell companies that eventually led to the church's SEC fine, which we're going to be discussing a lot today? Is it one of those three, or is it something else?
I mean, I think those are definitely up there. I mean, look, personally, I don't consider the November policy a leak.
Okay.
And basically just the 3-sentence thing of what happened there was I was in a private Facebook group that had just a few people in it. Somebody posted about this, that their ward clerk friend had told them about this policy, and it didn't sound true to me. So I posted about it on Reddit and on John DeLynne's Facebook page, thinking, something got lost, broken telephone situation, there was something missing here. And then it just went viral. And then John DeLynne reached out to me, and I put him into contact with this person who told me, who was able to get John the actual memo. And then, it kind of went from there. But so I was basically, I wasn't, I didn't really facilitate a leak. I think what I was in that situation was I was the first person to post about it on large forums that then went viral. Okay. But as far as our actual leaks, things that were not, not meant to be made public, that were given to us by insiders or whatever, I think the salary, our very first leak after when we had the website, was the salary stipend information, and I think that's big. As far as I know, we're the first news outlet to publish salary information of the top executives since the church, made their financials, secret. We had the bubble chart that's often referred to as the enemies list. I think the Washington Post dubbed it the enemies list. That's the one that had John DeLynne's name in a big bubble, among a bunch of other things that the church feels are threatening to their existence. I know you mentioned the 13 LLCs, which I do think was big. The property story that we published last year, showing essentially that in terms of value, the church is the largest private landowner in the United States. In terms of acreage, they're in the top 5, depending on, any given day. I also think, getting away from the financial stuff, we published a story about Van Wagenen. I'm blanking on his first name right now. The guy who was Sterling. There we go. Sterling Van Wagenen, who was the co-founder of Sundance Film Festival with Robert Redford, and was the executive director of Sundance Film Festival for, I think, the first 15 to 20 years, something like that. And he had basically molested a young boy back in the 90s. And our reporting led to another victim coming forward that the statute of limitations wasn't out on. And ultimately, Sterling Van Wagenen pled guilty and he is in prison right now as we speak. And I feel like definitely a team effort there. We're not solely responsible for that, of course, but having contributed to that justice, feels good. And for those that don't know, by the way, Sterling Van Wagenen wasn't just, a Hollywood director or whatever. The most recent 3 Temple films that I think went up in 2014 or 15, I think, the 3 new ones that they shot, he was the director, so they, they chose this guy who has molested at least 2 children that we know of, possibly more, as the person worthy enough to direct the most sacred video experiences in all of Mormonism. So that was something that made that story very newsworthy. But yeah, it's hard to pick one, to be honest with you.
Wow, they're all so big. It's just incredible. We have a little bit of time here because we're waiting on our other co-host before we get into the 60-minute stuff here. I have a lot of questions for you, and I don't want to, and your time is very important. When you put out last April in 2022, the church's LDS portfolio, the real estate portfolio, I believe your report identified about $20 billion in real estate. But since that time, the Widow's Mite report has upped that number from what I believe was your number, 20 billion, to 105 billion. And that was they released their report, I don't know, about 6 months later. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but why is it that the Widow's Mite report says that the church has $100 billion in real estate, but you were only able to find, I believe, 20?
Well, I don't know the Widow's Mite report. I don't know if they're solely basing it off of our spreadsheet and then just sort of updating the values. It could be that. Here's the problem that we were running into with that information. The number that we published, and you say we published 20 billion. I don't remember the number that we published in our story, but that does sound about right of what we would have published. That was a very conservative number. When we published that number in 2022, we knew it was more than that, but we just couldn't substantiate a number bigger than that. And the problem that we were running into with that is that our data was a little bit stale. First of all, our data was from, I believe it was March of 2020. So in 2022, our data was 2 years old, and we know that real estate values went up a lot in those 2 years, but we didn't want to try to guess how much it went up. We were not comfortable doing that. And we weren't able to do a good enough analysis to come up with a number. The other thing I want to say too is that we were basing our $20 billion number on the county records. So whatever the county said the property was worth, which we know is sometimes maybe even often low. And the other third element there that made our number very low was that there was hundreds, maybe even thousands. People would have to go back to the spreadsheet and look. Definitely hundreds, possibly thousands of parcels, big and small, that the counties that they were in had not assigned any value to them. And so the properties are there, but there's no value getting added into that 20 billion. And they're obviously worth more than $0. So when we published the number 20 billion, we were publishing that as sort of it's worth at least 20 billion.
Right. Yeah. If you look at the Truth and Transparency, the number that you valued back in April was around $16 billion. This is from your website. And the Widow's Mite report, it has totaled up the church real estate here from ecclesiastical buildings at 60 billion, Knowles Farms and Ranches 12 billion, BYU 10 billion, commercial and residential buildings 6 billion, mission homes 2 billion, and other property investments 13 billion. It's 100 billion. So it's a significant difference in between the two valuations. And I was just that made me wonder how it is that you came to two totally different numbers.
Look, let's assume for a second that they relied on our spreadsheet, because I mean, our spreadsheet, while I know there are properties that were not on our spreadsheet, I think we captured, pretty much all the real estate, at least non-single family. One thing that's not in our spreadsheet is single family residences that they own. It's only, duplex and above. But I think I really felt like when we published in 2022 just sort of eyeballing it and sort of back of the napkin math, I felt it was probably around 50 or 60 billion. I just couldn't justify it enough to put it in the story. So it would not shock me if they took our spreadsheet and had some professional analysis done. That, along with just general appreciation that has gone crazy in the last 3 years since that data was obtained, it wouldn't shock me that it is at $100 billion, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely makes a lot of sense. Now, Kolby Reddish, welcome to the Mormon News Roundup.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Now, this is our second time trying to get you on. Now, when you canceled the first time a couple of months ago, I thought for sure that the Spirit was warning you not to come on, but it seems like you've done it anyway.
Yeah, I don't think the Spirit works that way. I don't know that it ever worked that way. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Maybe not. So for those of you who don't know, Kolby Reddish, you're a member of the Idaho State Bar. Who are you anyway? What is your bona fides?
Well, so I'm an attorney that's licensed to practice in Idaho. I think what you're sharing on the screen there is an article kind of about my background in my career that the Idaho State Bar did last year in connection with an award that I won, which was very nice. And for the record, I didn't know we would be sharing this today. So this is you nicely sharing something that I've kind of kept close to the chest. But yeah, I was selected for this award, which after the year my wife and I had was honestly, when I got the letter, got the phone call, kind of talking me through that award, it moved me to tears because I care a lot about my profession. I care a lot about my personal integrity, and it was nice to know that members of my legal community had recognized that.
Yeah, you won the Young Outstanding Lawyer 2022 in the Idaho State Bar. So kudos for you. That's really something. Now, last year, I guess you gained even more notoriety last year when you went onto Mormon Stories and shared your story along with your wife, Cammie. And that's racked up over 100,000 views, which I think is more people than live in Idaho. I'm going to have to look that up now. What has been the reaction to your stories? You're a year removed from that. What has been the reaction to your Mormon Stories episode?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of good reactions from both sides of like activity in the church spectrum. Ultimately, so our Mormon Stories came out in February, and ultimately as Cammie and I tried to, in a nutshell, our story, what really triggered our faith crisis was that our sitting bishop was charged with child abuse crimes. I knew a little bit more about the nature of those types of crimes because of my background as a criminal prosecutor. I had done that earlier in my career, and I did what the church tried to do did not sit well with me. I will say, to our stake president's credit, he tried to do his best to help us try and push Salt Lake for policy changes on the child sex abuse issue and how the church handles it. Ultimately, we weren't able to make any of those type of changes. And so Cammie and I, in connection with, the reporting last August on the Arizona Bisbee case, I think really showing the church's priorities, Cammie and I decided to remove our records from the rolls of the church.
Okay, very well. Now, it's not just that you went on to Mormon Stories. You keep coming on to podcasts here. You went on to Cults to Consciousness recently. You went on to Nemo, the Mormon channel. You've been on radio you've gone on every single Mormon-related podcast. Why do you keep coming into this space? What is motivating you to continue? You said you had your membership removed. Why are you continuing to inhabit this space?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love Mormon people. I love so much about there are so many heroes that I would call like Mormon renegades that were people who kind of stood up against the bigger structure of the church. I think when it was making unhealthy moves, I'm thinking of people like B.H. Roberts. At my time at BYU, I worked as a research assistant for Professor Thomas Wayment, who's a very good man, a very good, credible Bible scholar. He no longer teaches New Testament at BYU, which blows my mind because that's his, he adds so much to that conversation from a more mature spiritual perspective, I think, on the New Testament. So I guess what I'm trying to say is my Mormon experience was shaped by people like that. And that's part of what I'm trying to do is find inroads with the members of my family or members of my extended community that are still choose to participate in the church. Because for the most part, they just don't know. They don't know They've been given bad tools, bad epistemological tools since the time they were little, just like I was. And so that's why I keep wading into the space. I think the simple answer to the question, why do I keep coming on Mormon themed podcast or ex-Mormon themed podcasts, is because people keep asking me.
Well, we're grateful that you did come on. I thank you both so much for coming on. We always start our episodes, before we get to the 60 minutes, we're going to spend plenty of time on that. We always start with a Mormon joke of the week here. And somebody has given us some leaked footage here. Speaking of Mormon Leaks, somebody has given us some leaked footage of President Nelson himself visiting Ensign Peak. Just wanted to play that for you.
Family truly is the greatest adventure of all. Oh no, the ground!
Okay, that's all you got. That's our Mormon joke of the week here. Before we get started, we always start with that one. That's I don't know if that was Mormon. If that was given to Mormon Leaks, I don't know if you published that, Ryan. Right?
Yeah, we had to pass on it.
I understand. Totally understand. Now, before we hop into the 60 minutes here, Lori Vallow, the Doomsday Mom, she has been convicted here. Kolby, this is in your neck of the woods here. You're an admitted pettifogger, very familiar with Mormonism, and live in Idaho. I can't think of anyone better to give us some analysis of Lori Vallow here. She's been convicted on multiple counts here. We're waiting for her sentencing, and she is smiling here for the cameras here. Look at this mugshot here. Wow, that is really, she is smirking after her murder conviction. Of course, she was accused of killing her two children, J.J. Vallow, Tylee Ryan, and there she is being escorted out of church. The Doomsday Mom, she's going to be behind bars. Her husband, Chad Daybell, his court date is coming up soon, and this has got to be pretty big in your neck of the woods, though, isn't it, Kolby?
Oh yeah, this is huge news. So I work in downtown Boise, and the Ada County Courthouse, where they had to hold the trial so that she could have a fair trial, even though it's being prosecuted, I think, by Fremont County, which is where my mom grew up. So yeah, it's been a very big deal. I'll admit freely, I haven't been following the case. I've been very busy the last couple weeks and haven't been able to get over and see any of it. My mom did go and watch and said it was incredibly sad. She only watched a few days, but yeah, the ultimate takeaway is that Lori Vallow was found guilty on all counts, including, I think, conspiracy to commit murder on one of Chad's earlier spouses. So that's really all I can offer. I know that we'll see appeals based on the trial, probably, that will continue for years. That's just kind of the nature of where these types of cases end up. But it's good news. I think one of the reasons I haven't followed it very closely, I'll admit, is because my time as a prosecutor, I have to very carefully choose what I engage with in the true crime kind of space, because it's that type of stuff gets very heavy when you've kind of waded through some of those files yourself and had coworkers who have tried those types of cases. And so I have to limit how much I expose myself to that kind of heaviness.
We should be seeing the sentencing trial come up. What is that in between? In this type of case, should there be a month or 2 months in between, or how long does that usually take before we would see a sentence handed down?
Yeah, I wouldn't expect anything for a month or two. They're probably going to do what's called a pre-sentencing investigation report. So they'll have her talk with mental health professionals and a bunch of other type of professionals to see, a little bit more about her background, mitigating, aggravating factors, stuff like that, before the judge hands down a sentence.
Absolutely. Now, we have a couple of other articles before we get into our featured article, because we do want to cover quite a bit of Mormon news. And this is interesting here. President Nelson has issued a statement on his health, saying that little challenges with balance should be the least of our worries. My heart is good, my spirit is strong, and my brain still works. And here we have a picture of him with his walker here, which is posted on social media. And this is very interesting here. It says, you may have heard a rumor that someone saw me somewhere using a walker or a wheelchair. Well, it's not a rumor. Here we have President Nelson wading in, letting us know what we should be worried about. And that kind of got me thinking, guys, here. And he says the least of our worries should be President Nelson and his balance. And let me tell you this, for once, I definitely agree with him. That truly is the least of my worries. But that got me thinking that, I wonder what should be the most of our worries. If that's the least of our worries, what should be the most of our worries? And we always have a Mormon News Roundup poll of the week. And that kind of makes me think, if his balance isn't very important, then what is important? Here's a couple of choices that I kind of thought about. This is just from 2 weeks ago. There was a $2.3 billion judgment in a sex abuse lawsuit for a single case. This was not a class action. This was a single case where $2.3 billion was awarded, and naming the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints from a woman who was abused for years in California. I thought, maybe that should be the most of our worries. Or is it the Boy Scout abuse claims that we still have about 75,000 of those class action Boy Scouts, many of whom were abused in the church? Maybe that should be the most of our worries. Or is it the declining church growth rate? The church has lost members consistently back. This is the church growth rate with regards to the world's growth rate. And for the first time in the last couple of years, the church is not gaining members as in a proportion to the world's population. Maybe that should be the most of our worries. Or is it the SEC settlement and the aftermath of the fine? Maybe that should be the most of our worries. I'm just going through a few things here. I'll get you guys to weigh in here in a moment. Or I'm not afraid to admit that one of the most of my fears is David Glenn Hatch. I'm not afraid to admit, gentlemen, that I am afraid of David Glenn Hatch. Maybe that's irrational. I totally understand if you're not, but personally, I am. That David Glenn Hatch, he's right up there for fears. I am a little bit worried about him. Or the fact that President Nelson, according to legend and rumor, he was snubbed for the coronation of King Charles. He was not invited. All of the other major world faith leaders were there. But President Nelson, he was snubbed. Maybe we should be worried about that. Or maybe we should be worried about BYU losing its accreditation over the transgender issue. Maybe that should be the most of our worries. That's hard for me to know. Or Brad Wilcox. Again, I'm afraid of Brad Wilcox. I don't know about you, but I am. He frightens me. That I call me irrational. Or maybe President Nelson should be worried that the Truth and Transparency Foundation has gone out of business. That should worry all of us, I think. Or the fact that half the people listening to this podcast are not subscribers, or that Kolby Reddish seems to go on every podcast but ours. Well, until now. Which any of those concerns? This is kind of a joke poll here, but should any of those be the most of our worries here, guys?
I mean, I think if I actually looked very often like I do in that photo that we took for dramatic effect, that would be the most of my worries.
That's a good photo. Yeah, definitely. That's just a joke poll. Any of those be the most of our worries? He says the least of Ryan. He says the least of the worries should be his balance. Do any of those that come out with our poll of the week, should those be the most of our worries or something else?
I mean, they were all pretty concerning to me. I'm kind of shaking in my boots right now.
Okay, one other article here, guys. Actually, two other articles real quick before we get into 60 minutes here. And this is the church, the United Nations General Assembly president has met with the first presidency. So he came to the church office building. You can recognize the interior of the church office building from a mile away here. And this is the current UN General Secretary. And his name is kind of difficult to pronounce, but it's Chaba Koroshi. I think I've got that right. Chaba Koroshi. He came to Salt Lake. He met with President Nelson. He met with a number of the church leaders here. And this is an unprecedented level of visiting here. I thought it was very interesting. Now, it is notable that President Nelson, he has not left the state of Utah except for one time since 2020. So if anybody's going to visit him, they're going to have to come to him because he's only left Utah once in the last 3 years. And, some of those captions on those pictures, guys, I don't know if you could read those. They were kind of small. So I blew them up here just for your ease of being able to see them. So let me show you what those captions said. It says, Chaba, you ever hear the Adam God theory? Maybe that seems like a good topic for conversation. I'm just putting that could be fascinating to him. I think that could be interesting. I could be a miss. I'm not sure. Or, sir, this is Utah. You're going to need a VPN to visit that website. I'm surprised. I'm surprised both of you are laughing. That means you know what that joke is. That's a little surprising to me.
That's a good one.
Okay. Yeah, you're going to need a VPN. And then I submitted my documents to Mormon Leaks. That's some red meat for Ryan there. That would be good. Or finally, can I interest you in seeing the Sword of Laban? That's something I would like to see. Those captions are very, very surprising to me. Any thoughts on that? President of the UN visiting President Nelson?
I mean, it's just more of their political hobnobbing that I think they've done for decades.
Definitely, and all going back to that Gordon. Well, we have record going back to the Gordon Smith, which you brought to our knowledge of what happened with Gordon Smith and Mormon Leaks. And what happened, just briefly, what happened with the Gordon Smith leaked tapes that we know that the church being involved in politics there, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, that was, of all those videos that we talked about in my intro section, that was the video that caught the media's attention the most. And it's what the basis of the New York Times article was about. I think Gordon Smith was a Republican senator from the state of Oregon, which I think is an important thing to point out because I don't think many of his constituents that voted him in were Mormons. He went to one of these briefings for the Quorum of the 12. This was after he had left office, actually. So at the time of the video that people can see on the website, he had just left office. He was no longer a senator, but he's kind of it's a debriefing. It's him recapping, his time as a senator and working with the church. And he talks about, how closely he worked with the church on getting guidance for votes. And then there were two really interesting things that he said that caught people's attention. One was that I don't remember what the bill was, but he talked about a bill that, you know, was really contentious, and his staff was not hearing back from the church on this bill, and so they didn't know what to do, and there was like a 6-week period where they were kind of in limbo, not knowing how to vote on this particular bill. Okay. And then the other one was he talked about his vote for the Iraq war, and talked about how, you know, one of his motivations to vote for the Iraq war was that, you know, if we could bring democracy to Iraq and freedom of religion along with that, that it would be great for the church. And I think at the time, you know, when people would interview me about it, I would say something like, regardless of your view on the Iraq war, whether you thought it was a good idea or not, I think everyone would agree that that is not a good reason to go to war with Iraq. So
Yeah.
those were kind of the things, you know. It obviously showed that the church is influenced. You know, I think if Gordon Smith had been a Utah senator, I don't think it would have been as scandalous, because you could make the argument that the majority of his constituents are probably Mormon, and they would probably appreciate him getting advice from the Mormon church. I'm not saying that would be good, but at least, you know, you could find some layer of justification there. But I think the fact that he was from Oregon, and I mean, go look up how many people in Oregon are Mormons. I'm sure it's a fraction of a, you know, probably just a couple percent, I would guess. You know, the fact that he's being influenced by the church, I think, is what's most troubling, when his constituency is not really made up of Mormons. And one of the really interesting things about this video is that I want to say, and there is a date on it on YouTube of when it happened, but it was like 2010, 2011, something like that. If this had been leaked back then, I wonder how it would have affected Mitt Romney's presidential campaign. Because I know one of the big things that people criticize Mitt Romney about, and I always, at the time, even though I actually didn't really support Mitt Romney, even though I was a believing Mormon at the time, but I did feel like this criticism was unfair when it would happen, is that, oh, is he beholden to the country, or is he beholden to the church? And I think he did a pretty good job of, you know, staving that criticism off. But I think it would have been really hard for him had this video come out at the time.
Yeah. Any thoughts, Kolby, on the church and politics and the UN being there?
Well, I have one thought. There are so many members in the area where I live. So, like, right down the road from us, not only have we had this Valo thing going on, we also have Ammon Bundy, who has strong, you know, like, anti-government sentiments. And I think his Mormonism really helps inform that, because of the whole idea of secret combinations, right? And I've heard that from many members, that, like, the government is corrupt because of secret combinations. And I think it's so funny then when the church gets caught doing things that it's spoken out against, like trying to, in closed door meetings, influence politics, you know, in a state where the church isn't even the majority, like Ryan's pointed out. And he was a federal senator, wasn't he, Ryan? If I remember correctly.
Definitely.
Yes, he was that. Yes,
That's what I thought. Yeah. So they're trying to
U.S. senator.
Right. So they're trying to affect politics on this national scene, not in open, you know, that this was something that had to be leaked to Ryan and his organization. It's just like, how many times can the church show that they don't really believe in the things that they say, right? Like, here they are literally doing secret combinations. And I know we're going to jump to the 60 Minutes piece. You know, it's so apparent at this point. I don't understand how people can't see it.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because the Mormonish podcast just this last week did an entire episode with that talked about how the church, on the road to statehood, on the church getting to become a state, the kind of corruption, deceit, and power and influence that that the church needed to wield in order to become a state. And this was put on by Ron Jorgensen, who, by the way, is coming onto the Mormon News Roundup. So this has been with the church from the beginning, trying to hobnob, trying to get involved with politics, and we're seeing that even in the modern day here with the UN visiting President Nelson. Now, our final article here before we get into the meat of our featured episode here is the church is building a new temple in Montana, or basically has built a new temple in Montana. And we normally don't cover the temple openings here, because the temple openings, they're pretty routine. But this one really caught my eye, because this is a temple unlike any other temple that you have ever seen. I'm going to play this TikTok here for you guys, and I think this is going to be very interesting. Check this out.
The Helena, Montana temple is the first temple to be constructed on site in 2 weeks. The church just announced a revolutionary new way to build temples to make the process more efficient, cost-effective, eco-friendly, and yet it is still gorgeous. I think this is just so cool. The church has contracted with an Alabama company called Blocks to construct the temple off-site in modules, transport the pieces, and then assemble the temple rapidly on-site. This modular construction method isn't necessarily new, but doing it at this level of construction for the quality and detail required for a temple is something else entirely. This temple is 10,000 square feet, 96 feet high, and was constructed in the Alabama plant in 25 separate modules. They then trucked the modules to Montana, where they were able to stitch together the modules in about 2 weeks. And then they also were able to install the electrical, plumbing, heating, cooling, and ventilation systems. With the rapid pace at which President Nelson's announcing temples, we just can't take 5 to 10 years anymore for construction. So this new process could potentially allow God's work to go forth at a much faster, more efficient pace across the world, blessing millions of lives. You can learn more at the Church Newsroom and follow for more Latter-day Saint news.
Okay, IKEA temples here, guys. IKEA.
So is that real or is that a joke?
No, that's real. That's real. That's from real Church News article. That is real. I know a lot. There's a lot of jokes and a lot of trolling on this podcast. No, that's a real thing. Yes, 2 weeks.
Oh, I missed the news on that one. I missed the news.
Assembled in modules offsite, then trucked on shit, and then just stitched together. No, this is a real thing. That's a real thing that's happening. You can make a temple now. I mean, they used to joke about the Mick temples. This is taking it to a nice level. You can make a temple in 2 weeks now here, folks.
Wow.
I'm wondering with your comparison to IKEA. Usually you get instructions there in English, and I think
and they're hard to understand.
Yeah. So does that mean these McTemple designs come with instructions in English and Calabian or the pure Adamic language? What's the second language that God sends these McTemples with?
Now this is a real article. I know I do a lot of trolling here. Ryan's like, is he trolling me again? No, this is a real thing. Yeah, that you can make a temple in only 2 weeks now on a fraction of the cost here. They're it's really impressive, very remarkable. They just
it's amazing. It makes sense, and I'll tell you what. Not that I'm trying to throw a bunch of kudos out to the Mormons, but it just really reinforces their ingenuity when it comes to thinking outside the box and I don't know, just from a business standpoint, it's actually I find it quite impressive from a business standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not from a religious standpoint.
Absolutely. And remember that the church has hinted that they want to get to 1,000 temples in our lifetime. And that was going to be very, very difficult because a lot of these temples are taking, like she said, 4 or 5 years from the time that they're announced until it's actually complete. 5 years. Well, if you're trying to get to 1,000, that can be very, very expensive. You're going to see, let me just play this clip for you here. This is Elder Pearson here, a Utah area conference here, Elder Eric W. Pearson, who's going to talk about the church's temple. And that's also going to help us. Also, he talks about what the church does with its wealth. And that's going to help us transition into the 60 minutes. Let me just play this for you, because those 2-week McTemples, that's going to help Kevin Pearson vision here.
Now, is it conceivable that we would get to over 1,000 temples in your lifetime? Absolutely. Absolutely certain. Now, that'll take a lot of money. Okay? Where will that come from? You got people wondering what the church is doing with its money. Well, as you can see, it gave away about $1 billion last year just to try to help with hunger and feeding the poor. But the purpose of the church is not to feed the poor and the needy of the world. It will continue to do that at an accelerated rate.
So that's the vision of 1,000 temples in our lifetime. And in order to accomplish that, remember, we're not feeding the poor, we're building temples. And this 2-week temple design, that's going to make it all happen.
Yeah, I wonder, the cynic in me, I hear all that and I'm like, well, if the purpose of the church is not to feed the poor, then why are you doing it? I mean, he says that's not the purpose of the church. Why are you doing it then? It's just, I hate this language that these guys use. So
remember,
it's so hyperbolic and meaningless, because if you repeat it back to them, they'll be like, well, that's not what I meant to say. Well, that is what you said.
Well, the church did add the 4th mission of the church a couple of years ago. Remember, there used to be a 3-fold mission of the church, which is proclaim the gospel, redeem the dead, perfect the saints. But it also added a 4th mission about 15 years ago, which was supposed to be taking care of the hungry. And that doesn't seem to be exactly what Kevin Pearson's priority is it, Kolby? And that's going to lead us directly into our featured article, right, Kolby?
Yeah. Let's talk about the 60 minutes thing. I would be remiss if I didn't just comment on, what I said earlier. Like, how obvious can they make this? Like that it's completely inconsistent with the New Testament Jesus. Like there's very clear story about how, inasmuch as you've done it unto the least of these, my brethren, you've done it unto me. And instead, they're just going to spend all this wealth on these buildings. It's just so misguided, I think.
Okay, that does take us into our featured news article here. And the first thing that I want to play for you guys is the 60 Minutes episode just landed last Sunday. But the first thing that we got in the 60 Minutes episode was they released the trailer first, about halfway through the week. And of course, the trailer is supposed to pique your interest. So let me play this trailer for you and get your thoughts, because this is a very interesting. Ryan, you've worked a lot with whistleblowers. What type of obstacles and courage does it take? Is he facing to bring this kind of thing to light?
Well, I think the obvious one would be, tarnishing his reputation among any kind of Mormons that he still associates with and wants to continue to associate with. You know, maintaining whether or not to maintain anonymity as a whistleblower or a leaker is something that I've had to deal with a lot of our sources, and you know, I've seen it work, I've seen it not work. You know, I don't know how he feels about having, you know, not remain anonymous or not. You know, maybe it's worked out for him. I don't know. I think I personally find there to be a lot of value in staying anonymous until, you know, either forever or until sort of, you know, things are fully adjudicated, because, you know, one of the pitfalls, and this is not a criticism, by the way, of David Nielsen for having come forward. I don't really care one way or the other that he didn't maintain anonymity. I'm just speaking just in general terms. You know, I think one of the things that happens when somebody leaks something or whistleblowers on something and makes their name known is the story becomes about them as opposed to the issue, and that can, it helps with apologetics. It helps it helps slash hurts, you know, clouding up the issue, depending on what side of it you're on. That's a good or a bad thing. And I think there's a lot of unintended consequences that a lot of leakers don't anticipate. You know, if it's a secret recording, for example, you know, now all of a sudden people are asking you, you violated this person's trust, which might be true, actually. You know, what was it? Was it worth it? Was it justified or not? You know, becomes a debate. But if I'll give you a very real example, the Sterling Van Wagenen case that we talked about earlier. You know, Sean, who has since come forward, you know, initially stayed anonymous, and we talked about that at great length.
Sean was abused. Sean was the child who was abused, right?
Well, back in the 90s, he's not the one that Sterling went to prison for.
Okay.
But he was the one, he made a secret recording. He basically brokered a meeting with this guy to get closure and secretly recorded him. He didn't break any laws doing it, but he violated the trust of Sterling Van Wagenen. And, you know, he was going back and forth on whether or not to come forward. You know, when we published the story, he ultimately came forward. I don't remember how long it was later, but it was several months, if not a year later. I don't remember exactly. But you know, so all of a sudden, instead of Sean having to field questions of why he violated the trust of Sterling Van Wagenen, we were able to, you know, the story was able to focus on Sterling Van Wagenen and what he did. And there's cases out there where there were some secret recordings released where the person didn't stay anonymous, and that is exactly what happened. People forgot about what the content of the recording was and simply focused on the fact that this person had violated the trust of something. So I think, you know, when people are leaking things and putting things out there, I do think they need to think long and hard. My advice is always to stay anonymous initially and let things flesh out a little bit and see where they go before you make a decision on that. But you know, every individual has to make their own decision.
Yeah, that's a great point. We've wrapped up the review of the 60 Minutes. Kolby, let me just get some last thoughts from you. How would you characterize David Nielsen as either a witness, which is essentially what this episode put him at? Is he a credible witness? And what about Bishop Waddell's demeanor? And also 60 Minutes bent. Did they have an axe to grind? How did you feel about how all of it turned out?
Well, let me start with your last question. So they're bent. I think that 60 Minutes really pitched this as like a David versus Goliath story. I think the church has been in the news for not a lot of great things over the past really since, you know, Lars Nielsen shared David's report with the Washington Post. I think the church is in the midst of a continuing kind of PR problem. And so I think it was easy for 60 Minutes to cast them as the bad guy. Now, you asked me a question about David Nielsen's credibility. I think he came off very sincere. I think he came off being driven by that principle that Ryan talked about earlier, which was part of the reason, you know, my wife and I spoke out also, is I really believe do what is right, let the consequence follow. That, you know, integrity is doing the right thing, especially when it's inconvenient. And so I think David has shown a lot of integrity. But I'll say specifically about your question about how will he hold up as a witness, provided this ever goes to court. One, I don't see it ever going to court. I expect even if the IRS moves forward, it will just be settled, much like the SEC allegations were. But I will say that at least based on the recordings we have, it doesn't seem like they really subjected David's claims or his intentions to any type of cross-examination. Now, I'm not saying that there's anything that indicates that he wouldn't hold up well. I'm just saying that, you know, being asked friendly questions that cast you as the good guy is completely different than being really subjected to the type of questions that come up on cross-examination, where you try and, you know, that's the point where the opposing attorney or, you know, someone with the opposite interest gets to ask you the harder questions. So So that's my real thought on David. And I'm not criticizing him at all, or saying that he doesn't come off as a very credible witness. I think he does come off very well and very credible. I'm just saying that we really don't have a great sample size. Now, the last question you asked was, oh, sorry, go ahead, Brian.
Well, I just wanted to, to echo what you're saying. I actually think, based on what we know right now, I think he might not do very well at all on the witness stand. Because I think it would be, again, based on what we know right now, unless he's holding something back, I think it would be very easy for a good attorney to, establish that he didn't know as much as he thinks he knows about what was going on, and that he was much more isolated in the operation than he thinks he was. And unless he can sort of combat that with some additional information, I don't think he would be that great of a witness on the stand just by himself.
Yeah, it's entirely possible. And that's really what I'm trying to say is we don't know. It seemed like very friendly questioning on Sharon's part. And I'm not saying there's anything untoward about that. I'm just saying it's a lot different when you have to be confronted with, I was going to say the great attorneys at Kurt McConkie, but the church keeps blaming them for all their mistakes. So maybe that would cut against it. The last question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
What I would say is that David Nielsen in this segment comes across as incredibly reluctant. And, typically what you want for your star witness is somebody who's just eager beaver and ready to take down the evil corp. If he came across as eager, ready to take down and rip down the church, and the church is an evil corporation, and I want to, it's done so many things wrong, it's harmed so many people. That would seem to be, I think, if I'm catching you right, Ryan, that would be more credible. But what we had is almost him very reluctantly saying, I wanted to do something great with my life, and it turned out that all I was doing was making money. And that's why I left Wall Street to begin with. And so that's my take on it.
That's actually not at all what I was saying, because I think that attitude that you present, that you say he could have of, being much more gung ho about, hey, let's take this down. I think that actually would hurt him.
Okay. I agree.
What I'm more referring to is if you go back and look at the original report that was published when he came out to the Washington Post, it really is nothing more than assertions. There really is very little to no hard evidence other than, like the 13 Fs that we had already put out there. And so for really everything that he says about the $100 billion, you kind of have to take his word for it. Now, that doesn't mean he's wrong, and it doesn't mean he's lying. So I'm not saying that. In fact, I have no reason to doubt him at all on the information he presented. It's just that he didn't really present evidence. He presented information that he's asserting to be true. And as an insider, maybe he comes with some credibility, but it would take an investigation from the IRS to really confirm that it was true. And I think that's the hurdle that he is not going to be able to cross with the IRS unless he's held back something, or unless the IRS has some information that when cross-referenced with his information is a huge conflict. I think that's what's going to be hard for the IRS to move forward, because he didn't really present any actual evidence.
Well, if you look at the Religion Unplugged news story that went along with this, David Nielsen released 90 pages of serious documentation to Religion Unplugged that details his specific allegations in great detail. And he allegedly gave more than the 90 pages to the Senate Finance Committee, which is much more. So obviously, we don't have access to his complete picture, so it's going to be hard to say.
I don't want to get too much into the weeds and be pedantic about it all, but like I said, you can write as many pages as you want about your assertions, and they might all be true. Like I'm saying, I'm not saying that he's wrong about any of this stuff. I'm just saying that, I don't know that what he's presented from what I've seen rises to the level of like something that could independently hold itself up in court and be the basis of a legal action.
Yeah. Okay. Any last thoughts on this? But I think there's 4 bonus overtime clips. We don't have time to get to those, unfortunately, because we kind of ran out of time. But is there any last thoughts on the entire 60 minutes episode, or anything else that you guys want to share before we wrap it up?
Well, I just want to, you asked me if I had any closing thoughts about how Waddell came off. And this is a talking point I think happens a lot kind of in post-Mormon spaces. There are a lot of people who assume that church leaders, Waddell included, are mustache twirling villains. And then there are other people who venerate them and think they're just the most brilliant people in the world. I think the truth is somewhere in the middle, in the sense that I sincerely do not believe, I really take the tack that Sam Harris does on this. He says that like bad ideas are much more, there are very few bad people, but there are a lot of bad ideas that lead otherwise good people to make bad decisions. And I think that pretty much sums up my take on the church's leadership. I'm not saying that what they've done hasn't broken the trust. I'm not saying that what they've done, at least potentially, isn't serious. But I think we need to recognize that like they seem to sincerely believe that what they're doing is justified and that it is furthering God's kingdom. Now, that doesn't mean that that's true. But that's kind of my takeaway, is that what it confirmed to me watching Waddell and some of the other clips we've watched, the Bednar clips and everything, it just confirms to me how truly out of touch these men are. Like, they really, really live in this echo chamber where they're not getting access to the full picture of the reality of the human lived experience. And it's mind-boggling to me that someone can make a joke about billions versus millions, right? Like the thing we watched with Bednar. And a lot of Waddell's clips came off the same way. I think he came off, I think he didn't, he followed his marching orders and didn't give the reporter anything really to work with additionally on top of Nielsen's allegations. He used some apologetics that, like Ryan and I've talked about, absolutely don't hold up to like 2 seconds of common sense. But I've seen a lot of TBMs eating them up. And so I think that's where, speaking out against bad ideas or ideas that just don't hold up is very important. That's kind of my last thought, is I don't think the church leaders are mustache twirling villains, but that doesn't mean that their actions don't have real consequences and cause real harm in people's lives. And I think I would hope that they start to build down or tear down the echo chambers that they built up for themselves, because the church isn't going away. And so all I hope is that it does less damage to people as it continues on down the road. And I think they are making moves in that direction, but it's not without pressure from the outside by people like Brian and people who hold them accountable. And so I think that's what we can do to help make the church better, is to hold them accountable to what they say.
Yeah, just a couple last thoughts from my own perspective. Bishop Waddell, he showed no contrition, no apologies. He just doesn't care. He didn't give 1 inch to anything. No one, according to him, made even the slightest mistake. This is all according to divine plan. He's smiling throughout the entire presentation. He didn't acknowledge even one problem. And another big takeaway is that the church feels no ethical or moral obligation whatsoever to disclose anything to anyone or to do good with its substantial resources. And don't forget that according to the General Handbook of Instruction, as someone who helped perpetuate years of investment fraud, Bishop Waddell and other senior church leaders, for that matter, should be subject to mandatory church discipline. It says mandatory in the church handbook. Not grinning across from a journalist as he tries to spin good PR for the Lord. So I want to thank you both so much for coming with me on the Mormon News Roundup to ruminate on the great and spacious beehive, as we call it. And thanks so much for being here. And remember, no one hell of hand can stop this podcast from progressing. We're going to go live on YouTube with this episode. I'm going to edit it, and we go live on YouTube Sunday nights at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So long, guys.
Thank you.
When it comes to nicknames of the church, such as LDS Church, the Mormon Church, to remove the Lord's name from the Lord's church is a major victory for Satan.
Satan.